Hi everyone. We are just setting up for our Instagram live. Fabulous.
Hi, Fionn. How are you?
I'm good. How are you this evening?
Good. Focus Ireland's inaugural Instagram Live.
I know we're breaking the internet. Well, hopefully not. We have a message to get out this evening, so that can be after we break.
Absolutely.
Let me see. I am just going to add our description here to the comments so that the lovely audience can see what we are at for this evening, and see if I remember how to pin it as well.
Yeah, I think.
As always.
Fab.
Fabulous. That is there. So I think we said we were going to give it a few minutes anyway to let people join us.
Perfect.
But in the meantime, happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
No, it's fantastic. It's certainly a different type of celebration than used to. But you know what? We're getting through it COVID-wise. But I suppose this is maybe a prime opportunity to kind of flag other support services in the area. Because, you know, Pride is a celebration, but it's certainly still a protest. And we're aware that there are people might need support out there. So are there any support services that come to the top of your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So while the issues are vast, there are some incredible supports that are available to LGBTQ plus people and young people. And so the ones that would come to mind are Belong to Youth Services would be one particularly for young people aged 14 to 23. So they are based in Dublin, but they offer services all across Ireland. And then LGBT Ireland would run the National LGBT Helpline, and they have services throughout the year as well. But also Outhouse would offer workshops and a safe space for members of the community. So it's really important to have those three flagged as well. And then for trans-specific issues, we have TENI, which is Trans Equality Network Ireland. So all incredibly valuable resources, all excellent partners of Focus Ireland as well, particularly in the research space, which we're going to chat about a bit later too.
Absolutely, we won't spoil that too much though in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've a nice few members have joined already. So I'm just going to give a quick intro. So my name is Kerton. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the community fundraising manager with Focus Ireland. And I have been working in the LGBTQ plus space since around 2014. So I would have been the university lead for Dublin City University with Yes Equality throughout the marriage equality referendum. And then from there went to work for Belong to Youth Services as the fundraising officer. And now I'm co-founder of a business accreditation body that's called it's called Certified Proud. I mixed them up along with another Focus Ireland staff member, Liam Redmond. So with that, we're trying to make the workplace a little bit safer for LGBTQ plus people through audits, through workshops, through training, and providing that support network too. So yeah, that's me. How about yourself, Fionn?
First of all, I just want to say a hearty congratulations on founding the program to both yourself and Liam. It's a really fantastic resource center. Fantastic to see that such initiative in that space. But for myself, my name is Fiona Scott. I use he, him pronouns. I am the team leader of the Extension Youth Service, which I'll tell you all a little bit more about later on, but brief snapshot, we are the Focus Ireland Youth Service working with young people in the ages of 18 to 26 who are at risk of or currently experiencing homelessness. In terms of my background, I am also a member of the LGBT community myself and have been involved in advocacy for the community for the past 12 years, and then as a professional community youth worker for the past 6 years. So that's kind of a snapshot bio of myself.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fionn. So suppose just to give our people who've tuned in a bit of an idea of what it's like for LGBTQ plus people in Ireland at the moment. So some really kind of shocking stats have come out recently, and as recently as yesterday, some of these figures that we have. So 41% of LGBTQ plus people actually conceal their identity, whether it's their sexual orientation or their gender identity, in public. And this is due to fear. So whether it's discrimination, verbal abuse, and even sadly violence as well, and we've seen it in the media in the last few days too. And when it comes to young people specifically, they're actually far more likely to drop out of school due to this discrimination because of the mental health impacts. 68% of students have heard homophobic remarks about them in school, and 3/4 of Irish LGBTQ plus people have been victims of verbal abuse as a direct result of their gender identity or sexual orientation. And sadly, recently as yesterday in Belong To's report, in the Life in Lockdown, 119 young people just in that report have said they've experienced homelessness. since lockdown has happened. So the pandemic has had its impacts across the board, but it is it's really saddening to see the impact on homelessness, but particularly LGBTQ plus youth as well. And we've really seen a rise in that, Fionn. And is there a particular reason that has those numbers and those figures are popping up as recently as yesterday?
I think there are, and there's quite a few of them actually. So I suppose to start that off, I'll a bit of the global context to it and preface this discussion with the fact that this is the first LGBTQ plus youth homelessness specific research to have taken place in this country. So it's fantastic to see that step ahead. So some of the context that we're working in is based off of projections from the internationals. So in terms of that, international research would show, that's from the UK, Canada, US, Australia, would show that it's anywhere between 22% to 40% of people within homelessness are members of the LGBTQI plus community, which is staggering. Even if you look at the smallest end of that scale, that's still 1 in 5 people in services, the people who have self-reported as being in homelessness, have identified as being members of the community. So part and parcel of that is that mental health, unaffordable housing, addiction, all of these are standard occurrences within homelessness. And in terms of that, no, young people accessing services are no different. They have individual experiences that are linked to these as well. But there is a bit of a difference in terms of their experiences. That tends to come out a little bit in this research here as well, which is the experience of coming out and not necessarily being in spaces that affirm their gender identity or sexual orientation. So that can be massively impactful for people. In terms of that framework around there, we also see a lot of the breakdown of the family unit, which becomes part and parcel of it as well. Now, that is to preface that that homelessness very rarely happens as this spontaneous moment. The breakdown of the family unit or a caring environment can be gradual, not to say it can't be so, but certainly the outing oneself or coming out of the closet can be a massive factor. On top of that, there tend to be a lot of prevention and early intervention systems around the school supports or family mediation, and the supports that are there don't tend to focus as heavily on the LGBTQ community and very much specific tailored services for members of the community. And as a result, it can sometimes miss the mark in terms of supporting people out of homelessness, because in terms of supporting people, it's better to prevent a person entering services than it is to try and treat the issue at the far end of things. On top of that, mainstream services might not necessarily cater specifically to the needs or sensitivities of LGBTQ plus people. And similarly, Ireland doesn't have specialist housing or gender neutral accommodation, which particularly for trans young people is quite an important consideration with the vulnerabilities that go into that.
Absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned some of the research that was done with Belong to Youth Services. Could you tell us a bit more about how that came about and how it was run?
Yes, so it was a collaborative piece between Focus Ireland and Belong to Youth Services. And I really like the context that was mentioned in the forward study, which is sitting at a research report from another study. An intern turned around and asked, well, what data do we have about Ireland? And there had been a larger discourse about this within the agency in advance of that, but that was part of that sparking moment that brought about the question of we need this research, because to ignore LGBTQ plus young people within homelessness is to ignore a massive aspect of it. So the researchers undertook this and published the document in 2020, and it interviewed 22 young people over the course of just over a year, between the ages of 18 to 30. So it was done in a qualitative manner, so it was quite confidential interviews, and it was very much heavy on trying to find out the experiences of the young people. On top of that, service providers as well as key working support staff and policymakers were also interviewed in the process to get a balance from the multiple ends of things.
Yeah, I think it's a really crucial document, and one that is, I think it's so important when you're coming from a fundraising space as well, that you have this evidence and you have this proof that you're able to bring it to funders, you're able to bring it in an advocacy space as well. It's absolutely crucial that you have the documentation of this evidence too. So I think it's a phenomenal piece of work. And Fionn, what would have been the key findings from that report piece?
So, shock horror, homo, bi, and transphobia still exists.
Yeah.
That is kind of the core of a lot of it and how it informs the other findings that came from it. So there were three main areas that were looked at from the youth perspective, which was the becoming homeless, the being homeless, and the leaving homeless cycles. In terms of becoming homeless, it was identified that a lot of young people would have experienced, the breakdown of the family unit, care, and not necessarily had tailored support services for themselves as young LGBTQ plus people
Mm-hmm.
who needed that little bit of a different approach to things or might need a different style of support services there. And unfortunately, because of the breakdown of family units, it went alongside the other bits and pieces that we're seeing around, let's say, a lack of sustainable housing, being priced out of rental markets, a reduction in supply of housing. All these bits and pieces collapsed together were noted, but then that one unique piece that stands out from the experience around there is the coming out process and how that was often a trigger or an instigator. As I mentioned before, family breakdown in some cases doesn't tend to happen overnight. However, it was noted that the coming out process was in some cases the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and that was quite impactful. In terms of that, being homeless within services, this concept of the double closet exists. So our tropes of what does it mean to be homeless nowadays in modern Ireland, modern Europe, doesn't necessarily always align to the historical ones. So as a result, young people often distance themselves from that identity and distance themselves from that space because they didn't necessarily want to associate themselves with homelessness, based on findings. And in part and parcel of that as well was the removal of themselves from services, both from a safety reason, because one of the key areas of that was people didn't feel safe accessing services. And that is a dreadful thing to hear when you consider that a person in a space of complete and utter need for support was not able to access a service out of fear of safety or fear of being validated. So as a result, and in addition to trying to distance from the traditional identity of homelessness, we see a lot more instances of people in hidden homelessness. So couch surfing, that would be staying in friends' places as a means to avoid entering emergency accommodation. Part and parcel of it, though, is entering services was perceived to be dangerous. So this double closet then comes into it, as well as the part of coming out of the closet in terms of sexuality or gender identity, but then on top of that, homeless identity as well. But when within services, a lot of young people noted that it wasn't necessarily safe for them to be able to do so. And that when they were finding it safe to do so, it was often with the interventions of staff who had vested interest or knowledge or were able to support a young person in a very tailored way. Most importantly, staff who were able to ask questions and ask questions in a safe, consistent, boundaried way that supported young people as opposed to presuming that a service was going to necessarily fit them. So in terms of that, it was also noted that when entering services and possibly closeted in services, there was a massive stigma involved in that. And we've certainly heard about the stigma and shame that can come with being minority identity, particularly sexuality, sexual minority or gender identity minority. So for that to be compounded whilst residing in services, it made it quite difficult for the young people who were into the study. And in addition to that, the move-on process was a challenge. If we consider that stigma and stress and mental ill health can have long-term consequences, the capacity to maintain a stable accommodation after being in services and after essentially bisecting part of your identity for so long is massively impactful. So in terms of the leaving homeless, that's where we see a little bit of positivity. So very much positivity around that when young people were showing such great resilience in the area and tenacity to be able to get through this process and to be able to get through these challenges and struggles. Big aspect of that was the need for a community and an affirming space and a network of friends. The word that tend to come out a lot was safety, place of safety. So part of that can be the shape of having NGO services who are able to provide that sense of safety and will be able to provide tailored support services. But on top of that, it was also included social elements, being able to have a sense of social safety in a space. Supportive key workers were a big element, as I mentioned before. And just to note on that, the supportive services were the most beneficial when they were appropriately trained and resourced. So one of the findings from the survey would be the need for appropriate training and resource for staff, so that it is not necessarily down to the individual to purely resource the situation themselves. So that's a bit of a not so brief snapshot on the
Fantastic, thank you. And you can just see the mental and social implication of having that double closet that you spoke about there. You can imagine the knock-on effect that would have with somebody throughout their life as well. So that's the need for that readily available supports, whether it's in the direct service that they're in at that time, throughout their lives. And that's why I think it is so crucial, as you said, to while to have these supports available, but we also need to work in that prevention space as well. So I know that that's one of our key markers that we actually have when we're working towards ending LGBTQ plus homelessness and homelessness as a whole too. But would you mind just bringing us through, like, how do we address this problem? So I think we have a fair idea now, and hopefully our viewers have an idea of what the situation is like at the moment. But how do we solve it? It is shocking. We've comments coming through that it is unfortunately not surprising, but it is quite shocking. But how do we combat this, Fionn?
So I suppose the first stage of combating something is that we need the evidence to be able to actually tackle it.
Yeah.
A lot of what we have heard from, and certainly from my experience with frontline services, tends to be that anecdotal piece. We don't necessarily have the figures and the statistics to back up everything. But the narratives that are there are existing in that space. And so, you know, you can question in terms of challenges associated with it, because we're asking the person to disclose a lot in that space. But ultimately, we need research, because we need to evidence that this is something that is very significant in terms of our areas of work. And ultimately, that does move into the territory of prevention and early intervention, because if we have the evidence to say, well, it's currently a problem, then we can advocate for, let's say, that's a plug on this one, the youth homeless strategy coming in, for a prevention pillar that doesn't just address youth homelessness as this one homogenized unit, because we have noted that LGBTQ plus young people experience services differently. There are setting conditions to their entering homelessness which are unique to their experiences. So that needs to have a special consideration, a special place within that pillar. So that's certainly something we can do in terms of an advocacy perspective, and something we can do from a campaigns perspective. On top of that, I did mention that some of the areas of support came from staff members with vested interest and who had skill sets on this area. And a big thing that was noted from this is, that's fantastic. It's great, because you found this key worker who's there to support you, who has hold space for you in an unconditional manner, who's there to listen and hear. However, what happens if the person moves on? Rely overly on an individual occupying the space without strategic support, then we run the risk of an inconsistency in service provision. And actually, the whole premise of support services, that inconsistency is an area that we tend to can be damaging for a person. If you've got somebody who is so willing to invest time into your relationship as a professional and commit to sharing information about themselves, and then they encounter inconsistency, that can be so damaging. So in order for services to better operate, and in order to have a bit more standardized way of operating, it really is important that we see the strategic input around this, and specifically in the prevention. So that'll be a big one. Some of the other recommendations from the research would have been that we do need better educational family and support services around the prevention piece, so that we can, you know, act as dams along the process, that we can maybe move a person into a different path, support their family around this. I do like the phrase that when a young person is coming out, and it's the idea that when you're coming out, you've built yourself up to this process. It's taken a while. It's emotional. You've gone through all these internal processes to get to the stage where you're willing to share that information, and you share it with somebody, and you're hoping that their reaction will be instantaneous in the space that you've built up over time. And sometimes we do need to acknowledge that people who are being coming out to require that bit of extra support as well, and that space needs mediation, and there needs to be a little bit more of a wraparound and that. So that's why the educational and family support and mediation is really important, because these dynamics can in some cases be repaired, and acting as a stopgap before entering emergency accommodation removes the young person from experiencing the trauma of being in emergency accommodation, of having their family and carry the breakdown, and allows them a bit more of space of stability. On top of that, specialist training for staff and services is definitely where we can go on that. Not relying on a person's own independent learning curve on that, but actually having these standards set in terms of an agency. And part and parcel of that is agencies standardizing that practice and visibly showing that they've standardized it. It's no good saying we've trained up everybody to be sensitive to these issues, but a person walking through the service has no visible cues to see if it is a safe space for them to make this disclosure. Waste a lot of time and energy to try and figure this out for themselves. And ultimately, if a person has been burned before by inconsistency, they might be far more reticent to do so. So we're set in that context there. So certainly visible displays of safe space, whether it's down to posters, whether it is when you're doing an induction with somebody, you're asking them their name, you're asking them their gender pronouns as well. It's normalizing these kind of situations that give permission for a person to explore themselves and their space and make these disclosures. On top of that, if a young person is in accommodation services, one of the recommendations is for privacy and safety strategies, because we do have to acknowledge that spaces in emergency accommodation can sometimes be challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this added layer of that double closet on top of it. So if a young person isn't feeling safe enough to disclose in that space, or doesn't have a guarantee that their disclosure is going to be dealt with in a confident and a compartmentalized and very boundary way, then ultimately it puts that disclosure at risk, so they're less likely to do so. And similarly, if something does go wrong, having the policy and procedures to back it up so that the young person knows the pathways, it's evidence, it's clear, it's transparent. Those forms of accountability are really integral to this process. On top of that, there was a recommendation for utilising the current resources of key workers out there, not to ignore the work and the commitment that individuals have put in so far from the Dublin Homeless Network, to be able to kind of aggregate people together and look at the resources that are there and maybe work on a peer support model. But those would be the main bits and pieces. And on top of that, I think the message that I just generally want to stress to people is ask questions, be open to have conversations, and just make sure that you are coming from a place of integrity and wish to support. Because if you're asking questions, if you're providing a space that's safe as possible, that's a big step in towards making a cultural change in the organisation service.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned there that people build themselves up for that time where they come out, whether it's to their friends, their family, and their workplace. But I think what a lot of people, I think outside of the community, don't realize that it's not a one-off occasion that you have done that coming out and suddenly it's a weight lifted off your shoulders. You're doing it every single day. So you're doing it in the workplace, you're doing it when you sit into a taxi, you do it when somebody asks you what you did with your weekend. So it's a constant, lifelong thing. I wish it wasn't, but sadly it is. And if people can make that experience easier for members of the community, if you can be an ally, if you can step up on behalf of somebody who is clearly like those figures that we had, like if 3/4 of people are hiding their identity, if like it's now, I think it's 43% of people go back in the closet upon starting their first job for fear they won't be promoted, for fear of discrimination, uh, for fear of judgment, and that they will be harassed in the workplace, because sadly we have the evidence. It is happening, and it's happening every day. So I think if anybody is listening to this, the coming out does never end. Thank you, Liam. That there is so much that we can do as well. So that's, I think, a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last few years has been trying to change hearts and minds, and to get people to realize, like, look at this huge impact that's having on people, and that we can't stand by and allow this to happen. So I think that's a huge amount of what went into the Foundations of Search Brave Proud as well. But for yourself, Fionn, you mentioned that you are the team lead of the Extension Service. For anybody who doesn't know what that service is, would you mind letting us know?
Not at all. So in fact, I'm happy to plug the service. In terms of the list of services that were mentioned earlier that support LGBTQ plus young people, we certainly are a very, very safe and affirming space ourselves. So the Extension Youth Service works with young people between the ages of 18 to 26 inclusive, so right up to the end of 27th birthday, to the end of 26th year. There we go, not there. I should know my criteria by now. So you're currently in homelessness, or you're currently at risk of homelessness as well. We're there as a support. So what we do is we are both a drop-in service, as well as we're a service that provides education and training and personal development workshops in a very much a youth work environment and methodology. First and foremost, though, we are there as a safe space where a young person can have and can find a respite from homelessness and just can be a young person. Because I cannot stress enough how important it is for young people to have the space to be young people. Sure, we might be talking about young people experiencing homelessness or young people who are LGBTQ+. Those are identities that are very important aspects of identity at the moment and for a lifetime, depending on the one just referenced there. But a big part of it is working with young people as a whole and giving them a space to just exist. So a big part of that is, in order to get a space for young people to just exist and be able to explore their identities, to personally grow and develop, and to be able to engage in supports, is having a space that is safe. So we do a lot of work around visibility and service in terms of having posters up that meet the study criteria there of showing that this is a space where all gender identities and sexualities, minorities, etc., are welcome. It's very big aspect of it. But a big thing that we would have as part of our service provision is having young people involved in the decision-making capacity of the service,
Yeah.
being involved, because handing power and autonomy back and having young people working in partnership is a surefire way to make sure that spaces stay consistent, and meeting their needs, because ultimately it's a service for young people, ideally led by young people. Part of that in terms of the actual day-to-day is the drop-in space. So very little filled, very much knock up on the door and come in for tea, speak to a staff member, and just chill. It's a big part of it as well, which doesn't tend to often happen in homeless services. With the days pre-COVID, when doors were closed and you need to make busy your day and things like that, it was very much a vital space for you coming in off the street to have that respite for services, respite for business. On top of that, I did mention that we do workshop and education training around personal development, things like that. And that's something that is also important around it's a bit of a side note here, in terms of if you are operating those spaces, to make sure that provisions for LGBTQ plus service users in there as well. There's no point in running a sexual health education workshop if it's not applicable to your cohort there. So having these type of tailored service provision is a big part of what we do. And that comes through the Your Service, Your Voice model, that idea that young people contributing back to how services run. Because if it's not relevant, we'll very quickly find out. So the beauty of the space is we're very malleable, we're very adaptive. We grow, we develop, we change. And certainly to acknowledge COVID times as present, that if you are somebody who needs to access the service, or who would like to access the service, or would like to refer our client to us on, you can do so through emailing us the extension service at focusarm.com. So, or alternatively, if you email us that way and out and about, we also do outreach. So we're able to link with you out on the streets, have a bit of conversation, see what we can support you. So it's a bit of an idea in terms of where we are as a service. So
I think it's so incredible, and the fact that the onus and the importance that you're putting on the peer-led space as well, because in a lot of spaces, I think, like in a managerial space, or whether it's within kind of boards, people decide what they think people need to learn, and they decide what they need. Whereas if you actually took a moment, rather than investing a lot and thinking that this is the right thing to do, if you actually listened to the people that are directly affected, it makes such a phenomenal difference. So I think your service is fantastic, and it really, what I'm hearing, like as you're speaking to me, is it gives such hope. Like it gives so much hope to people who have gone through so much in order to be where they are, and to be greeted by someone like yourself and your phenomenal team. I think that is a real light. I think that you do such fantastic work, and coming from the fundraising space as well, when it does get so tough sometimes, and it can be stressful when you're reaching your targets, but when you see the direct impact that our work has, that working with yourselves, and to see the phenomenal work that you do, and the impact that you're having on people's lives every single day, it's so essential and crucial. So I'm very grateful coming from my space for the work that you do, Fionn. So thank you. I think it's a great reminder, and it's very inspiring and very humbling, I think, for all of us that are in the support services team. I think you are really, really exceptional. And then a few questions that have popped through to us. So we had a question box up earlier on our Instagram page, and then one of the questions was, is there any agenda for an LGBTQ plus specific accommodation service? Is that possibly down the pipeline?
So that's a really interesting question, because it was certainly something that's noted from the research, was that this was an area of a gap in Ireland. The short answer is we need more research in terms of that, because we do need to be able to evidence the need for it. However, I can't necessarily speak to the particular plans of action on that, because we're still at very early stage of the research process. However, from the research findings, it does seem that it was considered a valuable asset of having these gender neutral spaces, or having these considerations for accommodation services that are very much tailored to the needs of young people. So I can only infer from that information.
Absolutely. And how did you protect the identity of the young people that took part in the report?
Yes, so all of the participants did so in an anonymized manner, and all of their data was suitably anonymized in part of in line with the ethics and confidentiality portion of the research on that. In terms of how the young people gathered, there was calls put out through services, and similarly, the members of support services and key workers were also sought through those channels.
Brilliant, fantastic. And then some people had messaged us, how can they actually help themselves? So what can they do? So within the fundraising space, whether it's an event with your friends and family, whether you want to do a virtual bingo, right up to corporate partnerships or one-off gifts, or indeed if somebody wants to set up a regular donation, so whatever you can give, whether it's weekly or monthly, it really does help. And it has been hugely heartwarming to see the support that we've had from our donors and our supporters, whether they are individuals or it is a corporate team that has done a fundraiser for us. It has been I think it's been a fuel for all of us, whether it's in our services team or within our fundraising team, to actually see how kind people have been. So we are so grateful to our supporters, and it is fantastic. But if there's anyone that would like to get in contact with us, we'd be more than happy to help you set up your fundraiser or whatever you'd like to do. But also we have within our comments, we've included some of the support services that are available. So if you can scroll back up, we have the LGBT Ireland link there that has services all across Ireland as well. So we're conscious that it's obviously a nationwide issue. And while we are both based in Dublin, there's Focus Ireland services across the country, as there are services that are LGBTQ plus specific too. And then if you're looking more in the entertainment space, Rock Against Homelessness is taking place this weekend. And there are some incredible queer artists and LGBTQ plus artists that are having their visibility. So there is Panty Bliss is actually our MC for the evening, which I'm very, very excited about. And then the fantastic Pillow Queens are one of our headliners. So they're fresh off of James Corden's show in the United States, and they will be working with us. And one of their members is actually a member of Focus Ireland Services team. So it's fantastic to have that link there. And there'll be amazing other artists too. So we have Tola McKay, and there will be Aslan, and then Paul Walsh from Roy 7 as well. So it's gearing up to be a fantastic night. The tickets are €23 and they're still available on Ticketmaster. So I'm super excited for that. So I can't wait. Really, really excited. So it'll be streamed from the Olympia Theatre as well. So if you would like to get involved, so you can enjoy your evening, enjoy your weekend, but also contribute to Focus Ireland services as well, as we work together to end homelessness. But I think that is all we have time for, Fionn. I am so grateful for you for imparting your wisdom and sharing the incredible work that you do. And it was an honour to share the first Focus Ireland Instagram Live with you.
No, look, thank you so much, Eve. And I'm really genuinely, you're a fantastic host, and it's such a pleasure to have this chat on and have this opportunity to talk about this stuff, which is really so relevant and important for Pride. And just to extend to you and all of the support services team, as well as all of our funders and donors, a massive thank you from services. This kind of work can't be done without support and without the voices being heard. So thank you from the very bottom of my heart. Happy Pride.
Thank you so much. Happy Pride. Happy Pride, everybody.
On that note,
We'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I've got to figure out how technology works and actually ending it now.
No problem at all. Sure, we'll keep it going.
Okay, hopefully. And goodbye.